without further ado, I'm going to dive into my keynote presentation today, Maximizing App Return on Investment, How to Attract and Retain App Users. So I'm going to be covering 6 key topics today that are relevant to attracting and retaining app users. I'm going to talk about what you should do before you launch your app, what you should do when you're launching your app. I'm going to talk about how you should onboard your users, the data you should be analyzing, how to retain users, and also how to drive referrals from the users of the apps themselves, so you don't have to do all of the work engaging with users, driving more users, and keeping your users. And in case you're wondering what ROI stands for, it stands for return on investment, also known as the value that your app would be generating for your organization. So let's start by talking about pre-launch. So pre-launch generally involves pilots. Now, pilots are incredibly useful. Not only are they really easy to run, and they can be really small, like you don't have to do a big pilot. The other thing is you can also do multiple pilots if you want. So the great thing about pilots is they're low risk. We usually encourage our customers, if you're going to run a pilot, just start with kind of people in your team, people who sit near you in the office, people who you speak to regularly on Zoom or Teams calls. And what you can do with these pilots is you can very rapidly get feedback from users. One of the advantages of being able to get feedback from users quickly and people that you trust and you aren't too worried about maybe giving you overly negative feedback is you can get feedback from users that point out maybe things that are confusing them, things that maybe they think are missing, things that don't make sense, bugs, etc. You can gather that feedback very quickly. We've started to recommend customers do multiple pilots. So let's call it pilot 1, might be just people who sit near you, so to speak. And then you might go and run a second pilot. That pilot might include, say, stakeholders involved in the app. Now, the reason why you would typically include particularly important stakeholders in your second pilot is it's most likely you're going to find the most issues in the first pilot. It's also, you might find things that don't make sense that you want to improve before going and showing your more important stakeholders in the second pilot. Pilots don't have to take a long time. They could just be a day, 2 days. It really depends how quickly you can get people using the app and providing feedback. Depending on the complexity of your app, a pilot might only take a few minutes, such as 15 minutes for a user to go through. You could even run a pilot in a meeting if you wanted to jump on a Teams call, ask everybody to access the app via web or FLIPLET viewer, and then you can say, all right, everybody, pop yourselves on mute, have a play with the app, make some notes about what you think could be improved. In 15, 20 minutes, we're going to come off mute. We're going to have a conversation about what you all thought. They can be really fast. And hopefully, by explaining how pilots work, I'm also highlighting like the maximum benefits or the types of benefits that you can receive from pilots. The other great thing about using FLIPLET to run pilots is you don't actually have to deploy the app. What you can do is you can use FLIPLET Viewer. You can even get the app on your device on FLIPLET Viewer, go to a meeting, give your device to somebody and say, can you play with this app for 5 minutes for me? Of course, you can also produce a web app, which people can access on their computer or on their mobile device, and that will just give you a URL, and they are instantly deployable. So you can distribute your app very quickly without the burden of having to go through the whole launch process and gather feedback very quickly. So pilots, critical. And then the next point is building awareness. So one of the things that you can also use your pilots for is to learn what people really like about your app. And then you can take those statements and you can promote them as part of your launch campaign, which I'll talk about in a second, to help to communicate with your target audience for your app. What are the benefits of your app? And so this is great because you're taking feedback from the people who actually use the app, not from the people who kind of came up with the idea, built the app, maybe describe the app's functionality in a technical way, maybe how FLIPLET, with the FLIPLET features that are used, etc. None of that really matters to an end user, of course. If the user's like, oh, I love this feature and this feature is so valuable, if that's what your pilot group is saying, then you can take that information and you can share that out as part of your promotional message. You can also, as part of building awareness, start talking about the benefits of the app before you launch it. This is really valuable because it'll mean more people are ready to install the app when you actually distribute it for the first time. If you don't build awareness before the app, it just means you're more likely to have a slower uptake. So one of the advantages of building awareness before you launch is that your users will be ready to go when you actually launch. Now, there are 2 types of users that typically apps are being distributed to. They could be distributed to staff. So you might use internal communication mechanisms like your intranet, your internal newsletter, Teams, Slack. You could use group email as well to build awareness that the app's coming, and here's some of the things you can look forward to. And if it's with customers, you might start to include it on your website. You might put it in regular emails, particularly if it's an app related to a particular practice of the firm. You might start to include it in emails correlated to that practice. You could start to ask people associated with that practice to start to talk to customers about it. Explain what you're working on, explain it's coming soon, get them excited before you launch. So these are all pre-launch activities. Now let's move on to launch. Quick segue. You're probably wondering, why has Ian put a star next to automated campaigns? The stars in this presentation, or the Keynote presentation, indicate features that we have built or are building that will make this part of our recommended process for how to maximize your app's return on investment easier. So basically, we've built an automated campaigns feature, which I will show you in more detail when we get to the roadmap section in about an hour. So automated campaigns. What are automated campaigns? Automated campaigns are a series of emails, push notification, text messages, whatever you want them to be, that are sent to people. Now, typically, most people will not take action when you send them a single email. And that's for two reasons. One, they may not read the email because it might not be a priority to them. And obviously, if they don't read it, say within the first week, the likelihood is they'll probably never read it because they won't go back through their inbox far enough to catch up. The second aspect is they might read it, but they might read it at a point where they're not quite in a situation where they can take action on your email. So although they might have read it, they might not have done anything with it. And so for those two reasons, you do need to make sure that you're communicating about your app multiple times with your intended target audience. And so that's the reason why automated campaigns, sometimes called drip campaigns, are so important. Once you've kind of kicked off your automated campaign, you can also think about other methods that you can use to promote your app. One example is town hall meetings, if it's a staff-facing app. Another example for staff-facing app is like an intranet or company-wide newsletter. One of the things that I always recommend customers include is a QR code. The advantage of a QR code is most people know that if there's a QR code, they should scan it with their phone. And a lot of apps are now installed via QR code. So by including a QR code, you're also potentially helping to differentiate your app when you're communicating with your colleagues. Posters and flyers, old school mechanisms of communication, they can be really effective because our digital communication channels are so busy and so congested that you can kind of break through the noise and get some tension on your message by using posters and flyers, because so few people use them anymore that it actually can help you to get the message across. One of the other things you can also do is you can incentivize people. So we've had customers in the past, for example, say for the first 100 users who install this app, we're going to give them some branded merch. And it's worked very effectively for them. It doesn't have to be branded merch. It could be entry into a raffle or a giveaway. It could be food. If you demonstrate you've installed the app, come to the staff room and you can get a cupcake, those types of things. So there's lots of different incentives you can use. They don't have to be particularly expensive and they don't have to be particularly sophisticated. They do require a little bit of money, but if it means you get users faster and you get feedback from them faster, it's potentially worth it. And of course, you can adjust these mechanisms. If it's client-facing, you just need to obviously work with the relevant people who interact with the client to determine what's the best methods of promotion. Let's move on to the third stage, which is onboarding. So onboarding is made up of education, more automated communication, and encouragement. And we are launching features, or already have features, that will support all of these aspects. So the first is education. So most of the time when you load an app, it will have some form of onboarding slider. The purpose of the onboarding slider is to introduce the app that the user has just installed or is just accessed, if it's a web app, and explain the capabilities and the benefits of the app. It's typically a slider because it's interactive and it's fun, and it's a good way to kind of show off some nice images. The other critical part is the onboarding slider is typically only seen when the user first installs the app, and I wouldn't assume that the user remembers what is mentioned in the onboarding slider after they've logged in, configured their profile, accepted the terms of use, and finally gotten to the navigate, like the main menu or the navigation or the first feature. So it's also really important that your app has clear navigation. And this is one of the reasons why having a pilot or pilots is so critical. You need to ensure that people understand your navigation. All the items in your navigation need to be really clear so people understand, oh, this is exactly what that feature does. This is exactly why I would use it. And if for some reason you're finding your pilot users are like, oh, yeah, I wasn't really sure what that menu item meant, so I didn't click it. And you're like, okay, well, that means then we have a problem, because if people don't understand it and therefore they're not interacting with it, then obviously people aren't going to use it. We need to fix that, or it's going to be underutilized. So the education piece, making sure that you've got clear navigation, and onboarding slider, which introduces the app to users, is really important. Next, you've got automated communication. One of the critical things that a lot of customers do is that they'll do a good job promoting the app, but once people engage with the app, they then won't communicate with them anymore. And that's a big mistake. So one of the things that we recommend people consider doing is, after somebody logs into the app for the first time, they then receive a series of onboarding automated communication, or a drip campaign, that covers off, these are the beginner capabilities, these are the intermediate capabilities, and these are the advanced capabilities. You can figure out what your beginner, intermediate, and advanced features are, again, by observing or talking to your pilot group and saying, what did you do first? What did you do second? What did you do third? And you can kind of therefore bucket your capabilities. The other thing is you can use the beginner, intermediate, advanced to kind of highlight more and more sophisticated capabilities, but only communicating those sophisticated capabilities once you're fairly confident that the user has understood the earlier capabilities. So there's no point explaining, look, you've got really advanced filter and search capabilities in this part of the app, if the reality is they need to be comfortable using, just browsing the app, understanding the features first. So it's important that you kind of think about, well, what information could be communicated at what point. My recommendation is this automated communication could be spaced like one communication a week over the first 3 weeks. So you really are just drip feeding information, not aggressively to the end user, but you're obviously welcome to communicate more often. And it obviously depends on the specific app. And then finally, if you don't continue to communicate with users predominantly via push, but you can use email and text message, if you don't continue to communicate with your users, it is highly unlikely you will retain the user. It's absolutely critical that you keep communicating with the user after they first using your app. If you do not, it's highly unlikely that the user is going to build a habit around your app. And if they don't build a habit around your app, then they will not be retained. So it's great to think that my app is so good, people will just naturally want to use it, but people are busy. So I wouldn't make that assumption. What I would do instead is I would build in a communication campaign after the user has onboarded to make sure that the user is being reminded that the value that the app brings, and hopefully encouraging them to go in and explore the features that you're talking about. And then finally, you've got encouragement features. So an encouragement feature in this case could be gamification and rewards. FLIPLET has a really amazing gamification feature. It's very popular. Lots of our customers use it. I'll talk more about it later on. But one of the critical things that this does is it encourages a user at their own pace to go and explore as many features as you want. It can also include a leaderboard, which can work as a mechanism of rewarding users who engage with your app a lot. They do the things you want them to do. They can therefore receive some form of praise and recognition. And we've got clients who, based on the leaderboard once a month, give awards to the people who are at the top of the leaderboard. So you can also use that as an incentive to be like the top contributor this month to the internal employee communication app will receive a $100 gift voucher, or will receive dinner for two, or a canteen gift card for $50. It's really up to you what you do, but encouraging people to go through, engage with the features you want, explore the capabilities of the app, and having that feature built in so people can do it at their own pace rather than waiting for the automated communications to arrive is really important. It's also really fun. Next, data. So your app will hopefully now have users. Congratulations. And your app will therefore be gathering usage data. And there's two things you need to do with usage data. The first thing is you need to look at the raw data. The raw data I would describe as what FLIPLET shows you in our analytics dashboard. It tells you the number of users, how many sessions, what screens are popular, what users did on those screens, etc. But it's all the raw data. What you need to do with the raw data is you need to start to perform data analysis. FLIPLET's analytics dashboard does very generic data analysis for you, such as these are the top screens in the time frame you've selected. But you might need to do more sophisticated data analysis. For example, if you had 300 users, you can't just treat them all the same. You might need to say, well, which users are finding feature A, B, or C useful, and start segmenting your users to then determine, okay, so why is this group of users going and using feature B a lot, but they don't seem to be using feature A? That's what I mean by data analysis. These two tasks are complementary, but they're very important. In case you're wondering, yeah, Ian, data analysis, I get it. I know I should do it, but it's hard. Wait until you see our advanced analytics demo later on, and hopefully we'll have a solution to solve this for you. Next, surveys. Another feature with a star. So one of the things that's absolutely critical is to gather feedback from your users and not just look at the analytics data, but also get explanations from your users about what they think of your app. We have been working on a survey feature. It's incredibly easy to use and deploy. I'll explain more about it later on. But one of the great things is it's fully automated. So once you've added it to an app, it'll just gather data for you. And it's also really polite, which is really important. You don't want to annoy your users, but you obviously can't be so soft on your users that they'll never give you any feedback. And we find that customers can sometimes struggle with this balance. So one of the things that our survey feature will be enabling customers to do is it will politely pop up at hopefully a point that it's not going to interrupt the user, cause any issues for them, encourage them to dismiss it because it's frustrating, but also not be so soft that we're not kind of reminding the user, hey, don't forget, you still haven't filled this in, and we really want to know what you think. And once your app starts gathering survey responses from your end users, whether they're customers or staff, that data can be sent directly to the relevant people who are maintaining the app, helping them to make more informed decisions, helping them to maybe go and do better data analysis, and in turn, helping them to determine what changes should be made to the app. And then finally, in-person feedback. Nothing beats seeing Fred or Joan walking down the corridor and saying, hey, Fred, have you seen the latest changes we made in the app? What did you think? It's great. It's easy. The only downside is if you're a big organization, you might find that you just keep asking the same people over and over again. So how do you get around this? One of the other mechanisms you can do is you can incentivize people. So if you're visiting a new office for the first time, maybe you want to block an hour in your diary, not the first time. Say you're visiting a new office, you haven't been there for a while, and you want to know what people think of your new app. You could say, well, like, hey, if you're interested, I've got 24 donuts and I'm sitting in the staff room. The first 24 people to come and tell me what they think of our new app will get a donut. Simple incentive, not very expensive. I guarantee you'll have 24 people in half an hour coming and wanting to talk to you about the app. And that's obviously just an example. You know, donuts can be swapped with anything, although from personal experience, I found donuts work very well. So a couple of stats. Did you know that 95% of opt-in users, so people who opt into push notifications, who do not receive a push notification in the first 90 days will churn? Just going to let that sink in. So what that means is after 90 days, there's the potential, obviously this is just a statistic, so it's a generalization, but after 90 days, if you aren't proactively communicating with your users, there's a chance that only 5% of your users will still be using the app. Now, I have a feeling this might be skewed slightly towards consumer-facing apps. And obviously, if it's a staff-facing app, you might have a bit more leverage around why a user would keep using it. But I think it makes the point, if this is what's happening in the consumer space, what that means is consumer apps will be sending notifications to people to ensure that they stay engaged. And if you've got a really good app, but it's not sending notifications, then basically you're not showing up on the lock screen. So how would users be reminded to go and engage with your app? Next, next interesting statistic, users receiving weekly push notifications had 440% higher retention rates than users who receive no push notifications. I don't know about you, but for the sake of sending a push notification once a week, I would probably want 440% higher app retention rate. That's a pretty compelling statistic. In case you're wondering, these are a bit ridiculous, Ian, where did they come from? They came from Urban Airship's benchmark report. And Urban Airship is a company that basically specializes in managing push notifications. It's used with a lot of very busy consumer apps. And they have a lot of data. You can dig into the report more using the basically just searching for Urban Airship report push notifications on Google. So let's talk about retention now that we've covered those statistics. So the first thing is communication. It's absolutely critical you are proactively communicating with your users. I mentioned that on the previous slide. But basically, if you're not communicating with them, I don't know why people would be hunting through all their icons on their phone, or remembering the bookmark, or going to the internet to find the link to your web app, or trying to find the email that had the link to the app. Why would they put all of that effort in to just check your app on an off chance it's been updated or it's got something good? Like, if the app isn't kind of proactively communicating with people, it's highly unlikely it's going to be getting a lot of users returning to it. And if people aren't returning to it, then you have a retention problem. So in order to retain users, we recommend figuring out a way. It doesn't have to be weekly. It could just be continuous, where you're communicating with users. And as I mentioned before, communication builds habits. It's absolutely critical that you get users to engage with your new apps multiple times to have a chance of building a habit, so they remember that they've got the app, so that they remember what to use it for. So then they keep using it, even if you decide to stop communicating with them. Obviously, if you stop communicating, you're probably going to see usage taper off over time. But again, you're welcome to run tests. You can use your analytics data, and you can see if usage works. And Dykema will go into a lot more information about this in their presentation. Next, we've got updates. Updates are critical. One of the big advantages of FLIPLET is it's so easy to make updates to your app. Updates could include content, feature tweaks, brand new features, upgraded features. There's lots of different ways that you can update your app. And what's interesting about updating app is it doesn't need to be a big piece of work, as long as it's focusing on delivering additional value to your target audience. One of the things that I've observed clients sometimes struggle with is that they don't have a lot of autonomy when making changes to apps. They have to go through a process of speaking to stakeholders, getting approval, making the changes, getting stakeholders to review it again. All of these steps ultimately mean that it takes an enormous amount of effort to update an app. One of the suggested changes that I have advised clients on in the past is talk to your stakeholder, get them to agree that you will need to make regular changes so that you have a reason to communicate continuously with your users. And as a byproduct of needing to make regular updates, you can agree on hopefully a process which is streamlined and that your stakeholders can get on board with and kind of approve changes faster. Another approach, which I've seen work, is that you involve the stakeholders in, say, the first 4 changes that you make, with the goal of getting them to give you autonomy, give you trust. And then once you've got that autonomy and trust, all of a sudden it goes from maybe a couple of hours every time you make an update to being like, I've made the update, I get one person in the team to make sure it's okay, and I push it. Meaning that you, instead of a couple of hours, it could be down to like 15 to 30 minutes. And then you send a new push notification and a new email out to your users, maybe just push notification. In FLIPLET apps, users can control their communication preferences. So you don't need to make that decision for them. You can communicate on every channel. They will tell the app how they want to be communicated with. But this change can then mean a much higher pace of being able to continuously make updates to your app, which in turn equals more value for your users, which means you're communicating with them more often, which means you're building a better habit, which means you're increasing retention. And then finally, Referrals. Now, I've left it to the end because not all apps kind of will benefit from this, but I wanted to mention it because if they work for your app, it will really help, and it will mean that you, as the person building and maintaining the app, doesn't have to necessarily put as much effort in. So one aspect is sharing. So if you can enable the content in your app to be shared, you can potentially restrict it to just be shared inside your organization. It doesn't have to be shared outside your organization. Obviously, if it's a client-facing app, you may want them to be publicly sharing your materials. But sharing is really important because then your users become the promotion mechanism and the communication mechanism to get the message out to other potential or current users. So sharing can be an additional accelerator to increasing the amount of communication that is going on in the broader world around your app. You can also use social features. I don't mean social networking features. I mean social features inside the app, like commenting, because a great way to encourage social engagement is to get people in the app kind of commenting and responding to each other, which in turn increases the value that they're getting from the app and increases the interaction. And it's a bit of a flywheel. And generally, it'll be like, hey, Fred, did you see the kind of comment Joan posted in the app? Oh, I didn't. I will go and look. So it also can become a form of additional dynamic content and functionality. And then finally, collaboration. This is a slightly sophisticated concept where the idea is that you ask teams or departments to be accountable for all doing something together. So for example, we're going to do a wellness challenge in December, and we are going to score each department. And so what that means is that the departments have to motivate themselves to use the app to report their activities to try to win the wellness challenge. This can work really well because then the department, you only need one person in the department to rally everybody else in the department potentially, and it kind of forms a life of its own. So it's kind of similar to social, but it's a slightly different technique. So in summary, today I've spoken about how important pre-launch, launch, onboarding, data analysis, retention, and referrals is. I hope that this has been valuable. Hopefully this has given you some ideas that you can apply to your apps. And I'm looking forward to see what you do with this information. I will be going into more detail about the features or some of the features that had stars in our roadmap presentation coming up.